If you spend more than $37,000 per homeless person and you still have a homeless problem, you might be a Democrat. If you're bothered by hot women on TV during football matches, you might be an idiot, or a leftist, or both, or a FIFA agent. On a more serious note, the Special Snowflake Brigade is now seriously arguing in favor of rape, or as they put it, against systemic racism of choosing with whom you have sex with. On a funnier note, but still damn serious, the Romanian government hit a new record. It proudly owns the most expensive website in the world that nobody uses. These are our stories on Periodic Insanity. Hello everyone and welcome to the 23rd episode of Periodic Insanity. Alrighty, such a long queue of insanity, the longest since I started the series, since this is the first time I'm recording 3 such episodes in a row. I could choose not to, but I've been getting angry emails from y'all. Because, basically you said practical politics content and content about obscure places is nice, but news commentary is wanted, so what can I do? Gotta adapt to the market somehow. Alright, enough with the nonsense, let's get in. The first piece of news for this episode is one about economic insanity, coming from Fox News. San Francisco continues to spend big in fight against homelessness, but is it working? Very, very long article. Quote, "It's a problem that's costing the city of San Francisco hundreds of millions of dollars annually to try to solve, and for its new mayor, something that's starting to become increasingly smelly too." London Breed says the amount of feces scattered on the streets of the wealthy city in recent months is among the worst she has ever seen, and San Francisco reportedly is set to spend nearly $280 million in its next budget fighting homelessness, an average of $37,300 for each of the city's estimated 7,499 homeless residents. I will say there is more feces on the sidewalks than I've ever seen growing up here. Breed, who was sworn in last week, said days later in an NBC Bay Area interview. She added that outreach groups funded by the city need to do a better job making sure the homeless clean up trash and waste from bodily functions they sometimes leave behind. There's a huge problem, and we're not just talking about from dogs, we're talking about from humans, she said. San Francisco in recent years is reported to have spent $241 million and $275 million from annual budgets on homeless outreach services and programs, most of which, according to the San Francisco Chronicle, involve supporting housing units that get people off the streets. For the first time, the city's overall budget this year will top $11 billion, the Chronicle reported. But for all the money San Francisco is throwing at the complex issue, the number of people living in the streets appears to be staying the same, according to data from a homeless count survey conducted last year citywide. Out of the 7,499 homeless people recorded that year, about 58%, or 4,353, were marked as unsheltered. The other 3,146 were designated sheltered. In 2015, when the homeless population was estimated to be 7,539, there were 4,358 unsheltered compared to 3,181 sheltered. And in data going back to 2013, when the homeless population was estimated to be 7,350, there were again 4,315 sheltered compared to 3,035 unsheltered, the other way around. We got a lot of means to interact with folks and talk to folks, but we don't have the means to keep them in homes. Dayton Andrews, a human rights organizer with the San Francisco-based Coalition on Homelessness advocacy group, told Fox News. "We spend a lot of money, but we don't have a clear picture for all the different issues that these social services need to solve." The most recent homeless count survey says about half of the city's homeless population is clustered in the one northeast district that includes the City Hall, the San Francisco Giants' AT&T Park and the corporate offices of companies such as Twitter and Uber. Those surveyed cited job loss as the biggest cause for their homelessness, followed by problems tied to alcohol and drug use. They also said their biggest obstacle to obtaining permanent housing is not being able to afford the pricey rents of apartments and homes in the Bay Area. The long-term solution to unsheltered or street homelessness is the same as the solution to all homelessness: provide housing exits through a range of interventions tailored to the needs of each individual and offered through a coordinated system, the survey concludes. However, the pathways from homelessness to housing are unclear and inconsistent. City Supervisor hopeful Nick Yosefovitz, however, says he believes San Francisco shouldn't invest a single public dollar without knowing if it is doing any good. Despite decades of well-intentioned bills, spending efforts, or guiding plans, the same tragic scene continues day after day and year after year, he wrote in an April article on Medium. Indeed, in recent years, the situation has become so much worse, yet too often City Hall is still making decisions on homelessness based on folk wisdom rather than hard evidence. Yosefovitz said the city government needs to double down on the programs that are working and shut down those that are not, in addition to conducting more frequent surveys. But in San Francisco, the persistent homelessness problem is also raising tensions among the public. Breed's comment last week came as the Fed Up Populist campaign placed a full-page ad in the Friday edition of the San Francisco Chronicle warning residents to watch their backs. In the ad, a person describing themselves as a disgusted female San Francisco resident for now claimed she recently witnessed a homeless person wielding a large pair of scissors inside the cafe at Neiman Marcus store. The San Francisco City Fathers and those who should be held accountable for our public safety have for years let us down by catering to the lowest common denominator, the ad states. Sit with your backs to the wall, fellow citizens. Breed told NBC Bay Area about 70% of the people estimated to be homeless in San Francisco were actually housed in San Francisco before they became homeless. So they need to be held accountable for taking care of our streets. I work hard to make sure your programs are funded for the purposes of trying to get these individuals help, and what I'm asking you is to do the work with your clients and ask them to at least have respect for the community, at least clean up after themselves and show respect to one another and people in the neighborhood, she said. The San Francisco Mayor's Office and Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing did not respond to requests for comment from Fox News for this article. Of course they didn't. Now, isn't it interesting that these problems tend to metastasize into literal shitholes only where the left is in charge? And not just any shithole, but brutally expensive shitholes to boot. I mean, over $37,000 per homeless person? Are you kidding me? I mean, if I may paraphrase Ronald Reagan, we could send them to Harvard for that money. Well, not really, since a year at Harvard is now about $67,000, but still, you could for sure send each and one of them to an undergraduate program at Stanford with $37,000 a year. What stuns me is the tunnel vision of all of the officials quoted in the article. I mean, they say that the biggest obstacle is the housing prices. Well, maybe housing outside the city could be an option? I'm serious about this. From a Democrat standpoint, this shouldn't even be hard to argue. They are all into the whole redistribution thingy, so why not redistribute some shekels from San Francisco to some of the surrounding communities? With that money, the city could literally build huge apartment buildings in one of the lower income communities or localities nearby. That would be the big government trade-off, which would, by the way, still save money. It most certainly would no longer cost $270 million a year. It's absurd. Yes, it would also cut the jobs of all the useless so-called NGOs, but that's a good thing. The problem is that besides incompetence, there's also a will to perpetuate this problem because it's a job-creating scheme for all the friends of the local politicians, and everyone knows this. There are also other trade-offs that could also be applied, but they will never be applied because it undercuts the power of the local politicians. For instance, since most homeless people are around the HQ of Twitter and Uber, how about propose a big tax deduction for these companies if they deal with the problem? I'm sure some of those homeless people could work as Uber drivers once they get back on their feet. Why not? The city should sell this as corporate social responsibility and then pat themselves and their fellow leftists on the back over how much they convinced the greedy capitalists to get involved, or whatever rhetorical device is fashionable amongst San Francisco leftists these days. Why not do that? Ultimately, this doesn't happen by accident. It happens as a result of several types of incentives. And San Francisco has been quite a hotbed of incentivizing most of this, with a long-standing program of giving free cash to anyone who essentially identified themselves as homeless. It also doesn't help that instead of cracking down on the dangerous drugs, the city made it easier to consume them. And it goes on and on and on like that in a vicious circle. Now, you will say that, well, come on, it's a bit more complex than that, and in a way it is. I found a very well-researched article on The Guardian from last year about homeless people in big American cities and the city's attempts to solve the issue, and chief amongst them being the so-called busing schemes, in which homeless people are basically given a one-way ticket to somewhere else where they say they have some support network. Now, some of that works too, but with the amount spent by San Francisco, it really is mind-boggling that nobody even tried to get private corporations on board to tackle this. Because mind you, if you shower the problem with money, it will at best have no significant effect, or at worst attract even more homeless people. And San Francisco has seen both. So maybe, just maybe, have someone non-insane do the spending? Anyway, let's go to the next story. So, the World Cup has taken place. Sadly, Africa won, and it's not me saying this, but even intellectuals in Senegal who sought time off from their jobs to watch the games of France, citing the fact they were the last African team in the tournament. Anyway, so while this was happening, the stupidity was also creeping into the ranks of FIFA in other ways as well. Coming from The Independent, FIFA in crackdown on broadcasters to try to stop cameramen picking out hot female fans. FIFA wants to crack down on broadcasters picking out hot women in the crowd at games as part of its efforts to tackle sexism in football. Pre-tournament concerns that Russia 2018 would be tarnished by homophobia and racism have not materialized, but sexism has been an issue. The anti-discrimination group Fair Network has been working with FIFA to monitor behavior at and around World Cup games, and its executive director, Piara Power, said sexism had been the biggest problem at Russia 2018. Speaking to reporters at a press conference on diversity issues before England's semi-final against Croatia, Power said his team have documented more than 30 cases of mainly Russian women being accosted in the streets by male fans, but believes the real number of incidents is likely to be 10 times this. He also said there have been several cases of female reporters being grabbed or kissed whilst on air. When asked what FIFA could do to tackle this, the federation's diversity boss, Federico Adiecki, said it has been working with the local organizers and Russian police to identify these fans, and when appropriate, they have lost their fan IDs and been forced to leave the country. But he then said FIFA has told its broadcast service to stop zooming in on hot women in the crowd and has been monitoring what the various national rights holders have been doing too. Asked if this was now an official FIFA policy, Adiecki said this is one of the activities that we definitely will have in the future. It's a normal evolution. We have done it on a case-by-case basis when some cases arose and they were pretty evident. We've done it with individual broadcasters. We've done it as well with our host broadcast services. He added it was not yet part of a proactive campaign, but said we'll take action against things that are wrong. It is unclear if Russia's host broadcasters have been warned about their habit habit of picking out pretty faces, as there was a well-publicized case at the beginning of the tournament involving a glamour model who received considerable attention during Russia's opening game against Saudi Arabia. In regards to other forms of discrimination, Adieki and Power agreed the various measures taken by the authorities, such as banning orders, diversity training, and so on, were successful, and the Russian people themselves have been great hosts. Argentina's Football Association has received the biggest fine, nearly £80,000 from FIFA so far this tournament, for the crowd disturbances during their 3-0 defeat by Croatia. It is understood that more than 20 supporters were identified by the authorities, and they lost their fan IDs and were sent home. The Russian FA's diversity officer, Alexei Smirtin, and former Chelsea midfielder, said fan IDs, which are similar to the identification cards Margaret Thatcher proposed as a solution to English hooliganism in the 80s, will be used in domestic football in Russia from next season. Power, however, said he believes football could be more joined up in how it deals with repeat offenders, such as Croatian fans and their nationalist banners and the homophobic chants popular with fans from Mexico and some South American teams. There is an issue with the continuity of sanctions, said Power, noting that both Croatia and Mexico have been punished by their regional confederations several times in the past. There is a gap on there that the FAs and fans have taken advantage of. When FAs are consistent offenders, that needs to be taken into account, close quote. And this, my fellow deplorables, is pure insanity. It basically tries to impose an extremist, narrow and marginal vision on a highly diverse and much more mentally sane phenomenon. The article is pretty badly written, as it conflates issues of violence, which is one understood and tackled in all confederations and football associations already, with the issue of politically correct messaging, which is fundamentally rejected by almost all national football associations, with the exception of the English FA and the French Federation and some loons at UEFA, whose extremist views have already been successfully marginalized after the immense scandal from a few years ago when Croatia's Josip Šimunić career, but basically that guy had his career effectively terminated because he said "for the fatherland" towards the Croatian fans after the match when Croatia had successfully qualified for the 2014 World Cup. At that time, UEFA supported the ban, but that created a huge rift, as most federations, especially the ones in Eastern Europe, but also the Italian Federation, said that was too much. This idea of quite literally banning the close-ups on hot women in the stands is so unpopular that I wouldn't be surprised if at the next meeting of FIFA's executive committee, this guy's dismissal will be subjected to a vote. But the very fact that there is such thing as a diversity boss at FIFA shows that wherever there is financial corruption, soon enough ideological and moral corruption comes as well. And the financial corruption of FIFA, I guess it's a well-known topic by now, so I won't get into that. But to come out and say it's a normal evolution shows not just obtuseness and huge disconnect from reality, but also shows that these people have infiltrated everywhere. That is why I'm advocating for our people to infiltrate and subvert, because while that method is slower, it is also always successful in the end. And in the case of FIFA, it's clear that subversion is far from complete, otherwise they would have tried to put this into writing and make it an official policy. But they know, just like I know, that such insanity would never pass any vote, because the broadcasters get a vote too. And they might play nice during a World Cup, maybe, but right after that World Cup is over, they might also launch a lawsuit. Ultimately, what should happen is for individual national federations to start to protest over such nonsense, because they have to. Just like the Polish Federation protested when UEFA started whining that Polish fans consistently display anti-communist and anti-Nazi and anti-cultural Marxist banners. It is not, nor should it ever be, the role of FIFA or UEFA or CONCACAF or indeed national federations to censor what is being said on the stadia. These asshats in suits don't seem to understand the game they're tasked to organize and manage. I mean, Let me put it this way. Wars have started as a result of football, and in many societies, the stands are one of the few places where unfettered emotion, both positive and negative, is permitted. Take that away and then you deal with the consequences. Most people don't seem to realize this, but many of the people who shout things in the stands you may believe are reprehensible are also the same people who are then office folks, doctors, lawyers, and so on and so forth. Not everywhere is England, you know? But if you take that valve away, you're essentially telling people that there is no room for their legitimate emotions, and when you do that, serious violence is not far away. Anyway, perhaps I should do a separate video on these things because I have a lot of things to say about this and plenty of examples. But until then, let's move on to another exhibit of government insanity, this time from my own backyard. Coming via Business Review, world's most expensive website. Romania spent 12 million euros to build a useless site. The Romanian government has spent 52 million lei or 12 million euros to build a web platform called e-Romania, which has 892 users and wasn't updated since 2013, according to an official report published by the Court of Accounts. According to the audit team, the portal solution was built to be accessed from the internet by a large number of users, up to 10 million users, 3 million registered users, and 50,000 users per second. The audit mission found that the e-Romania platform was visited by only 250,000 users and has 892 registered users with rights assigned by the ministry, who did not use the business intelligence resources made available to them. At present, the project is just a portal with information about all localities in Romania, but the portal is in fact only loaded with the information from 2013 by the provider and not updated since that moment, the report points out. The audit team considers that financial burden borne by the state budget is not justified by the results obtained by users following the implementation of this project. According to the Court of Accounts, other websites like Indeed, Wikipedia, or up-to-date websites of Romanian local and central authorities contain much more useful information and make e-Romania completely useless. On Wednesday, the website wasn't available for public, and the portal, developed by the local IT developer OmniLogic, was launched in 2013. I mean, what can I say? Congrats to the idiots who contracted this. By the way, the IT developer is actually not that local. It is controlled by the Austrian corporation GT Holding and by Campus Bay Invest, which is a shell corporation from Liechtenstein. The good news about this is that the corporation is steadily heading towards bankruptcy, having been involved in multiple scandals of corruption, their director narrowly avoiding jail after he cut a deal with the DA in exchange for giving out the names of more corrupt state officials. The bad news is that at best 30% of the wasted taxpayers' money will be recovered, and that's at best. The worst news, though, is that this record will not last. Soon enough, someone else in Europe will overcome it, or perhaps someone else in Romania, though I sincerely doubt, because the second most expensive website is a private one that is still being used. But why do I believe that? Because there have been tens of thousands of such portals all over the European Union, some of them built at the behest of local corrupt officials, but some of them aided and abetted by corrupt officials from Brussels. Also, 2 episodes ago we showed here the Swedish portal to teach migrants how to have sex. That lunacy swallows up to 700,000 euros every year and nobody looks at it, and it's been around for a few years already. If another leftist government wins, that website will soon exceed 12 million euros too. The point is that such insanity is endemic, and the reason it is endemic is because most of Europe functions under a maximal state mentality. And the bigger the state is, the bigger the corruption. The idea that the central government should make a portal for businesses is insane in and of itself. Even if the portal had not been that expensive, it's still absurd to assume that the central government can know better than local businesses what kind of information those businesses need. And until we grasp that the state must be smaller, this kind of lunacy will continue. Alright, Let's go further. Coming from, what's this, Daily Mirror. Leeds school is handing out spoons to girls to prevent them being forced into marriage. A school is attempting to tackle forced marriages by handing out spoons to students so they can hide them in underwear to trigger metal detectors at airports. Pupils at the Cooperative Academy in Leeds have been told to stash the cutlery in their underwear if they fear they are being taken overseas to be married. It is hoped the spoons could be used to trip metal detectors at airports, allowing would-be victims to raise the alarm with security staff. Harinder Kaur, the inner city secondary school's social, culture and ethos leader, believes the spoons can save lives. She told the BBC, "In the 6 weeks holiday, we know there is no contact between schools and the family, and families have that opportunity to go abroad, get their child married and come back. It's a way of making our children aware that there is a safety net there." The Academy is working with the charity Karma Nirvana, which campaigns against honor-based abuse and forced marriage and educates students about the risks. Last year alone, the charity took nearly 9,000 calls on its forced marriage helpline. Almost 200 of those calls were made either by children aged 15 or under or on their behalf. A law making it a criminal offense to force people into marriage came into effect in June 2014. Parents who force their children to marry can be punished by up to 7 years in prison, close quote. Now notice that nowhere in the article appear words like Islam or Africa, or indeed honest descriptive words like uncivilized, backwards, retrograde, or indeed barbaric. This comes from the same press that calls President Trump barbaric when he says the solution to the problems at the border is to simply refrain from illegally crossing the American border. But on the topic of spoons, this has been a trick that's been used for quite some time now, but the fact that it now needs to be taught in certain schools is testament on how much the problem has widened. And if we are to be perfectly honest, the problem will get even bigger as we go forward, especially in the United Kingdom, when even talking honestly about the problem can get you arrested or even killed. To make things worse, such cases will absolutely be used to increase the power of the education establishment over the families even more, with a now very predictable outcome, namely that it will be applied to the letter to normal people and rarely or almost never on the real problems. We saw this happening 2 years ago with the so-called anti-radicalization guidelines, which were being strictly applied on kids who were reading the website of the UK Independence Party, but never applied on minors who then went on to fight for the Islamic State. I wish I had better news on this, but we all know there can't be better news as long as the educational policy is shaped by the graduates from common purpose and as long as free speech on the issue is non-existent. Anyway, speaking of free speech, Facebook has now apologized for censoring the Declaration of Independence. Facebook has apologized to a Texas newspaper after flagging a post containing text from the Declaration of Independence as hate speech, writes Breitbart.com, who also cites the incriminating passage. So basically, an American company whose very existence relies on the Declaration of Independence and the US Constitution just bans the very text of that founding document. Because make no mistake, they didn't apologize because they believed the censorship was unfair. They apologized because they actually hit a newspaper which actually has connections and the means to rile up a serious enough protest. I mean, if I had a shekel for every time I personally saw people being unfairly censored by Facebook, I wouldn't be asking for money from y'all for the upcoming Jordan-Israel tour. I'd be having enough shekels just from that alone. Heck, I myself have been censored on one account for quoting a lawyer who was discussing the budgeting of a corporation 25 years ago. The lawyer had used the word niggardly, and I quoted him. The lawyer was black, by the way. A friend of mine was censored for quoting Nicolae Steinhardt, a Romanian theologian whose work has been translated in a dozen languages and is used as a study material in theology schools all over Europe. And on like that goes. Facebook is madness. That's why I stopped advertising the channel's page and for all intents and purposes removed myself from the network as well. That place is cancer. Now, speaking of cancer, last one for this episode, Asian American man plans lawsuit to stop sexual racism on Grindr, writes NBC News. One evening, while browsing the wildly popular gay dating app Grindr, Sinakone Kyodara came across a user profile with just one short descriptor: not interested in Asians. The same day, he received a call from a friend on the other side of the country who, like Kyodara, is Asian American. The two men began talking about the exclusionary language they had recently seen on the app. Kyodara, who immigrated into the US from Laos in 1986 and now lives in Los Angeles, decided he wanted to take action. So he took to social media last week and announced plans to bring a class action lawsuit against Grindr for what he described as racial discrimination. Please spread my call for co-plaintiffs to all your gay Asian men in your life that has been offended, humiliated, degraded, and dehumanized by Grindr by allowing gay white men to write in their profiles "no Asians, not interested in Asians," or "I don't find Asians attractive," Kyodara wrote in a tweet. "I'm suing Grindr for being a breeding ground that perpetuates racism against gay Asian men." He told NBC News Grindr bears some responsibility from an ethical standpoint. He said the social media company, which boasts more than 3 million daily users, allows blatant sexual racism by not monitoring or censoring anti-Asian and anti-black profiles. He said Asian American men from all over the country have already written to him saying they want to join his proposed lawsuit. One big legal hurdle for Kyodara, however, is Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, which provides broad protection for digital platforms like Grindr. Still, his suit brings to the public's attention an ongoing discussion among gay men who use dating apps, especially gay men of color. There's a clear sense of where you fit in the food chain of attractiveness on gay dating apps, according to Kelvin Lagarde of Columbus, Ohio. You can't be fat, femme, black, Asian, or over 30, he said. It will be either explicitly stated in the profiles or assumed from the lack of responses received if you fit any of those categories. Lagarde, who is black, said that he has used several gay dating apps, including Grindr, and has experienced both overt racism, such as being called a racial slur, and more subtle forms of exclusion. It gets to me at times, but I have to continuously ask myself why I'm getting so down because a racist doesn't want to talk to me, he said. John Pachankis, a clinical psychologist and an associate professor at the Yale School of Public Health, has been studying the mental health of the LGBTQ community for 15 years and has recently started to explore the effects of gay dating apps. Pachankis and his team have conducted a series of experiments studying rejection and acceptance on those platforms and the impact these experiences have on gay men. Though the results are still under review, Pachankis found that rejection for gay men can be even more damaging when it comes from other gay men. We have this sense that gay men's mental health is primarily driven by homophobia, Pachankis said, but what our work shows is that gay people also do cruel things to other gay people, and their mental health suffers even more than if they were to have been rejected by straight people. Pachankis said that many gay men believe things are supposed to get better after they come out, but this narrative is premised on the idea of being able to find one's place in the gay community. The reality is a lot of guys come out into a world of sex-seeking apps, Pachankis added. This is the way they find their community, and unfortunately the sex-seeking apps are not geared towards building an amazing chosen family, they're built toward helping men find quick sex. But while Pachankis acknowledges there are negative aspects to gay dating apps, he cautioned against demonizing them. In many places around the world, he noted, these apps serve a crucial role in connecting LGBTQ individuals. Lavunte Johnson, a Houston resident who said he had been rejected by other men on gay dating apps because of his race, agreed with Pachankis' findings about an added layer of suffering when the exclusion comes from within the gay community. There's already racism and all of that in the world as it is, Johnson said. We as LGBTQ community are supposed to bring love and life, but instead we're separating ourselves. Dr. Leandro Mena, a professor at the University of Mississippi Medical Center who has studied LGBTQ health for the past decade, said dating apps like Grindr may merely reflect the exclusion and segregation that already exists among gay men and society at large. When you have a diverse crowd at a gay bar, very often that crowd that otherwise may look diverse, pretty much it is segregated within the crowd, Mena said. Hispanics are with Hispanics, blacks are with blacks, whites are with whites, and Asians are hanging out with Asians. Perhaps in a bar people are not wearing a sign that so bluntly disclosed your prejudices, he added, noting that online some people feel comfortable doing so. Matt Chan, who lives in Washington, D.C., agreed with Mena, but said that discrimination and rejection he has experienced online has been less subtle. Chan, who is a Korean American, said he has received messages ranging from Asian, you, and hey man, you're cute, but I'm not interested into Asians. Kimo Omar, a Pacific Islander living in Portland, Oregon, said he has experienced racial discrimination on gay dating apps, but has a simple solution: hitting the block user icon. No one should make the time to interact with those kinds of fools, he said. As for Kedara, he plans to tackle the issue head-on with his proposed class action lawsuit. This issue has been a long time coming, and the timing is right to take action in this drastic way, he told NBC News. He says he plans to change the world one hookup app at a time. Grindr did not respond to NBC's request for comment. And this, my fellow deplorables, in addition to being absolute faggotry, is also metastasized cancer. Mind you, this is not the first time we've covered a topic like this. If you remember, 3 years ago we covered a feminist who was also essentially arguing against the freedom to choose your sex partners. We tend to, or at least I tend to, associate this kind of retarded thinking either with the feminists or with the loony incels who've already been turned into Asian-themed memes. I mean, just look up state-issued waifu on the internet to get a sense of what I'm talking about when it comes to already being turned into an Asian-themed meme. But this kind of thinking is also present among many gay men, particularly in the minority of gay men who are on the left. Basically, what we're seeing with the unattractive gay men, the same thing we're seeing with ugly women. The tendency to join a very radical train of thought which essentially seeks to make everyone else's lives more miserable for the misery's sake. The reason these fags are much more dangerous is because, unlike general ugliness, quote-unquote racism is something that way too many people believe it is inherently always wrong. And this is because of the extreme rhetoric that has been mainstreamed throughout, which basically any racial distinction even being noticed is immediately demonized. Because that's what discrimination is. The ability to make distinctions, the ability to distinguish. I explained this 3 years ago in the video called Is Discrimination Really That Bad? Which, by the way, I do urge you to watch. And because of this extreme rhetoric, it is now possible to seriously argue that people who don't want to fuck Asians are somehow guilty of some sort of moral failing, and that indeed one has a duty to fuck anyone without any distinction based on race. For the same reasons, it is also quite difficult for normal people to just simply say "fuck off, mate" and go on. And when asked for clarification, normal people should be very open to say, yes, I am racist when it comes to people I have sex with, I'm also deeply sexist and indeed very classist about it, and I'm very proud of it. because that's how these loons ought to be treated, and also because that's what reality is. Gay men and straight women are misogynistic in their sex lives. Lesbians and straight men are misandric in their sex lives, and almost all sexually active people overall are racist in their sex lives in some way, shape or form. And I say in some way, shape or form because there aren't really that many people who legitimately do not have a racial preference and would fuck anything that breathes. That's quite degenerate, even by degenerate standards. Ultimately, this ludicrous lawsuit is a direct consequence of allowing extremist rhetoric from the far left to go mainstream instead of going up in a helicopter. And I'm not even joking. This whole anti-racism thing should have been demolished and marginalized decades ago. And the fact that it wasn't means everyone has to now bear with scores of illiberals who want to ban all sorts of things in the name of anti-racism. Universities fuck up Asians in the name of anti-racism. Now some fags want to ban freedom of association and also curtail freedom of speech in the name of anti-racism. All of these policies and views are incredibly extreme and way outside the norm. And the fact that we're supposed to pretend otherwise is also extreme in and of itself. Anyway, I guess that's enough for now. I'm not done with the news queue, but I'll be damned if I record another episode now. There's only so much insanity that I can read. I need a break, so I'll go ahead and record a good news video to get the morale back up. Alright, so with all of that being said, thank you all for watching. Thank you for your consistent and generous support. Please do consider throwing a shekel my way if you derive any value from the work being done here. And I'll see you all very soon on the Freedom Alternative.